Well, failure to successfully integrate immigrants into society can lead to tension and indeed conflict, as we've seen happen frequently. These have a direct impact on stability at local, community and national level. To discuss how locals and society groups can work with government to promote more orderly migration and integration is Sharon Ekambaram. She's the head of Lawyers for Human Rights and Refugee and Migrant Rights Program. She joins us now on the line from the mother city. Good afternoon, Sharon, and thank you for your time on the SABC News Desk this Sunday afternoon.
Good afternoon, and thank you for having me.
Sharon, distressing images out of Soweto this week, and it does become clear that violence of this nature is coming as a result of communities, distressed communities, who are becoming increasingly frustrated with the socio-economic circumstances they find themselves in.
Absolutely. I think that's very important to stress that point, that this is as a consequence of extreme poverty, high levels of unemployment, failure by the state, local government, provincial government to provide services for communities. And what happens is that we turn against each other. And I think that's a very, very sad situation. And this has been happening for many years now. And while the media will cover instances like this, which attract attention when people's lives are lost, this is the ongoing experience of foreign nationals, and particularly our brothers and sisters coming from the African continent who come to our country, as was said in your inset, with having little choice, other than to flee conditions that they're living under.
Sharon, like we heard in the clip before, and so many times that from locals and their constant pleas about how they're losing their jobs to foreigners. So it does look like economic opportunities are at the heart of this as well. But we want to get a sense, or we want to get an understanding of to what extent does crime and poverty also fuel such acts, because there is a clear widening chasm between rich and poor and skilled and unskilled workers, and it is in this particular context that the non-nationals or foreign nationals arrive in the country, many of them fitting in between these demographics, all being highly skilled themselves or very low skilled.
Well, I just want to debunk a few myths that are become the narrative because of the unfortunate statements that are made by leaders. Firstly, there's enough proper research, scientific-based research, to demonstrate that the majority of informal business in Gauteng in particular is owned by South Africans. There's also enough evidence to show that where the tiny percentage of foreign nationals, migrants, refugees, asylum seekers who are running business are making a major contribution to the informal economy in things like paying rent to impoverished homes that is a source of income, that they are providing employment to people where they would not, there's chronic unemployment in our country, and this is the only means for many South Africans in these communities that you speak about, these impoverished communities, to earn some kind of survival. It's not even a decent income, and it's what would prevent many people from starvation and going to bed not being able to feed their children. So I think that's an important point, that it's important for the proper, correct information to be provided. We also hear very reckless statements from the Deputy Minister of Home Affairs, Ms. Chauhan, the Department of Home Affairs, talking about floods of people coming to our country. And these statements, they fuel this kind of xenophobia, because ordinary people in the street who are desperate then use that as and assume that that's why they're living in the conditions that they are, and that they don't place that responsibility at the doorstep of leaders in government, whether it's at local government, provincial government, or national government. And I want to make that point very, very clearly. The other point around crime is that we all, people like me, organizations like Lawyers for Human Rights, we're working in contributing to the struggle for social justice. An important element of that struggle is law and order and respect for law and order. And I think that a question that the media needs to ask is, where are the visible policing forces in instances like this violence? Where are the inspectors to go around and ensure that all business, not just foreign business, but all business, whether it's if you're providing any form of food, if you're selling food, that the correct standards are maintained. And if you are not doing that, then your license must be taken away and you must be prohibited from trading. You don't attack people. We can't take the law into our own hands. And I think that that's important points to remember when we're considering how to deal with the kind of crisis that exists in many, many impoverished communities.
All right, so we need an increased or stronger police visibility, and we need to keep away from blanket generalizations, especially from politicians and leaders who are sometimes guilty of making such generalizations, and dangerous ones at that. There still remains the need for foreign nationals to become successfully integrated into our community, Sharon. What are some of the key elements, would you say, of a successful integration? Because we are getting it right in some areas.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of work being done by organizations like Foundation for Human Rights and many others looking at social cohesion, how communities live together. But that would make very little difference if, and I'm sorry to go on about this, Keshini, but we have to deal with this inequalities that are facing our country. The fact that people are living in abject poverty and their conditions have not changed since the new democratic dispensation, which is not so new anymore. 22 years later, and people are still living in the same conditions. They're still facing the same problems, and there's still chronic unemployment in many, many communities. So for me, while, yes, we've got to look at integration, we also have to look at how do we work in solidarity to fight unemployment, to make sure that people have decent jobs with a living wage. That's the struggles that trade union movements like SABC and others are fighting for, is for a decent living wage for all. You can't live off a salary of $3,000 a month, let alone to run an informal work in a spaza shop, and that's the sum total of what your income is. So we've got to be looking at what kind of measures we can take to address this. And I think the other big problem around what faces many migrants and people coming from our neighboring countries like Somalia, where there's huge conflict and war, is that the asylum system in our country is in total collapse. There's huge corruption. It's been reported in the weekend's papers about the levels of corruption at the so-called Desmond Tutu Refugee Reception Office. And it's totally dysfunctional. So there's no means for people to get documented. And to be in this country without a legal document, aside from being unlawful, it's a life of indignity, because you cannot get your children to school, you cannot get to access to basic health care, and you get hounded by law enforcement agencies in what is very little different to the manner in which the apartheid police hunted down black people, trying to confirm that they have the necessary documentation to be in what was then so-called white designated areas. So these are all serious endemic problems that need to be resolved if we're talking about integration of human beings. These are human beings that have basic rights, the right to respect for the fact that they are human beings, their dignity, and it's trampled upon. And unfortunately, what we are seeing is that it's targeting, as I said earlier on, mostly black African brothers and sisters coming to our country.
Sharon Ekambaram, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. We are unfortunately running out of time. That was Lawyers for Human Rights, Sharon Ekambaram, joining us on the line from Cape Town. Let's move on to some other news now.